Journalism does not need Twitter. It cannot win a fight with Elon Musk on Musk's home turf. Quote, that's what tech investor and former advisor to Mark Zuckerberg, Roger McNamee, says in his latest op-ed about Musk's turbulent Twitter takeover. McNamee goes on to say, quote, the only way to beat people like Musk is not to play that game. That is the lesson we should have learned from Trump. It's the lesson we must learn now. The author, who is also and was an early investor in Facebook and Google, says journalists who are consumed by Musk's actions surrounding Twitter are making a mistake. Joining us now is Roger McNamee, the co-founder of Elevation Partners. Roger, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Talk to me about the parallels that you're seeing and what the fundamental message in this op-ed was, because I read this and it certainly struck me.
So Julia, I think it works this way. Twitter matters because it has been an unmediated broadcast platform embraced by politicians, by celebrities, and therefore by journalists. And it was never perfect. It was always a place with a tremendous amount of hate on it. But what it did that was really unique was that it gave both consumers, but especially underserved communities, an opportunity to send their message directly to politicians, journalists, and celebrities. And as a result, a lot of communities that have historically been left out of our political conversation were involved in it. And a big part of what's been going on the right is pushing back against all of those communities. And what Musk has done is he's come in and he's basically turned Twitter into a soap opera, in which he is not just the star, but he's the only character with a light shining on him. And he's used that spectacle as cover for essentially undoing all of what's been good about Twitter and going after all of those communities that have historically depended on Twitter to participate in our political system. And journalists have been covering the spectacle and missing the underlying point, the really important point, which is that private ownership of the most important communications vehicles in our country makes you very dependent on the owner. And in this case, the owner is somebody with really bad intent.
And amplifying, I think, some of the noise and amplifying the engagement on Twitter itself. How would you have journalists act? I think that's the response, because certainly in the discussions that I've already seen you have, that the tendency is, as a business journalist in particular, to defend oneself when it's now a private company, but there's impact on a public company like Tesla as a result. I think we have to get away from that discussion and get back to the point that you were trying to make here, which is how best we handle a character like this and a situation like this, particularly when I think democracy, free speech, all of these things are what you're talking about in the article are under consideration and perhaps at stake. How should journalists act?
So Julia, here's what I think the challenge is. The incentives of journalism are to follow spectacle, because they have been sucked into the economic model of internet platforms like Twitter, like Facebook, like Instagram. And so they're playing constantly for attention. The problem is that the role of journalism historically in our politics and in our culture has been to stand up against powerful people, to be a counterweight against those who have power, to protect those who do not. And journalism in this era has lost sight of that. And the example I use is, imagine if back in the era of the Pentagon Papers or Watergate, that the Washington Post or New York Times had buckled to the political pressure not to cover those stories. It's hard to imagine how bad things would have gotten in that area. And yet we routinely did this with Trump, and we're doing it again with Musk. And I do think that the key thing is to recognize that journalism has responsibilities, not every single day, but at critical junctures, to recognize when democracy is at stake, and to recognize that there are times to cover spectacle, and there are times when you need to simply be an adult and to look at the whole thing and recognize that, wait a minute, today, I'm not going to give this guy attention. Today, I'm going to focus on the needs of democracy. And I'm quite confident today is one of the days we should be doing that.
It's quite funny. It's not breathing further oxygen when a fire's also burning. Can I just make a counterpoint to this? And it is a conversation that I have certainly among my friends on a regular basis. Could an argument be made that the initial attempt in taking over Twitter in this case was about rebalancing and finding some form of middle ground between saying inappropriate, hateful things, which will always be wrong. And as you said, there is data now suggesting that that's been amplified on Twitter, versus not being able to say anything that might be taken offence or puts you at risk of being, for want of a better word, cancelled or in danger of a career-ending event. There is a middle ground, and I'm still not sure in society, wherever you are in the world, we've sort of found that balance yet. Could the intentions in the beginning be pure, but the whole thing's now out of control?
I think in principle that point is correct. What I think makes it less relevant here
Right.
is that we're dealing with a platform that is controlled by an individual, and it's centralized. It used to be the internet was highly distributed, and there were lots and lots of places where conversations took place. And the scale was much smaller, and therefore the economics were much, much smaller. And what happened was Google, then Facebook, and then later Twitter figured out how to centralize the communications on the internet and to centralize them in a way where individuals wound up having huge amounts of control. And that made us tremendously dependent on the values, the principles, and the behavior of those individuals. And if those individuals had proved to be, focused on the interests of society and very pro-democracy and pro-civil liberties, that would have worked out well. In which case your point would be completely the core one. But in this particular case, that's not what happened. That these platforms are dominated by people with very extreme viewpoints who've attempted to impose their views on the entire country, which, by the way, if we had a national debate about this and concluded that's what we wanted, that would be fine. But that's not what's going on. This is going on basically because we as a country are not acting as though we're in control. We're acting as though we're powerless in this equation, and we're not. And I just wish we could have the debate and have that thing right out in the open. Right now, we're just sort of sitting there and going, well, Musk is in charge, and he is. It's a private business. He can do whatever he wants. But we should not give so much power to that business. And that's what journalists are doing now. They're pretending like there's no other place for them to have their conversations.
I'm getting a deja vu sensation because I think there are other tech companies we could substitute in for this conversation as well that you and I have had in the past. It's such an important conversation to have. What's going on in the tech sector, Roger? Let's broaden this out, quite frankly. What has been achieved over the last 10 years? Because some of the big tech companies that we were talking about there, they were, or at least were founded in the decades previous to the last. And I just look at the investment tide having gone out, and a lot of the public companies' share prices having fallen over the last year. But it's sort of reminiscent of, I think, something that was or wasn't achieved over the last decade. What do you make of what we've seen over the last 10 years? What's the message today, and what are your hopes for perhaps the next decade?
So Julia, if you think back to the late 90s into the early aughts, a set of companies got created in that era. In one case, Apple rebuilt in that became enormously valuable and absolutely central to our economy. So, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Netflix, a whole bunch of companies became really substantial, not just by market value, but also by revenue and impact on culture. If we look at the past decade, the hallmark of that decade was the concept of the unicorn, the private tech company, a startup that would be worth billions of dollars before it had any revenues. And there were 1,000 of them as recently as the first quarter of this year. But now we've had this big shock to the economy. First, we had the COVID pandemic, and then Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And that's driven up interest rates, it's driven up inflation, and it's caused countries, it's really taken political unrest around the world and caused countries to move away from optimizing for economic growth to now taking into account all kinds of other geopolitical issues. And so there's a lot of tension in global trade. That has disrupted the whole economy. It's disrupted the market. It's taken tech stocks down. I think there are 450 that are down 70% or more this year. There are now no tech startups from the past decade that are ranked in the top 250 market cap companies in the world. There are at least none from the US. And there is one company in the Fortune 500 at number 437. It's Coinbase, a company that
Yeah.
not be able to hold that position. I think we're looking at a lost decade. And because I've been arguing that this has been an issue for a number of years, that when stock prices were up, nobody wanted to take the risk of messing. But now that we're flushing all of this nonsense out, we can actually look back at the last decade and realize in many ways it was just a massive confidence game, that people were promoting ideas, in some cases like self-driving cars or crypto, that either defied the laws of physics or defied the laws of finance. And, now that those things are being washed out, I think it's an opportunity for tech to redirect itself at the biggest issues that society faces. Things like climate change, things like healthcare, education, things like income inequality. Technology can make our lives so much better. And we have a moment, an opportunity right now where the cost is actually really low. We can recognize that we made a mistake for the past decade and go, you know what, we're just not going to do that again. We're going to do something better. So I'm very optimistic about what tech can do now. And in part because the market is doing the corrective action that we desperately needed to do to clean up the mess.
Yeah. And now we as journalists have to not breathe oxygen into lifeless stories or stupidity, perhaps, and push for the solutions to some of the world's biggest problems. I've got my marching orders. Roger, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Happy New Year, the co-founder there of Elevation Partners. Thank you.